another haunting story for this spooky season, where something about the atmosphere sends a shiver down your spine, far more than any autumn breeze. As always, welcome in. The once active copper mines of Jerome, Arizona may be long at rest, but the spirits of the miners who worked them don't seem to be at all. The historically rich town, overlooking the Verde Valley and Sedona's famed Red Rocks, was once dubbed the wickedest town in the West and thrived as a mining community from the late 1800s until shortly after World War II, when the demand for copper slowed. Since, Jerome's peak population of 15,000 dwindled to the 450 or so residents of today. To hear some of those residents tell it, the population would be much higher if you counted all the ghosts. I first visited Jerome as a 20-something newlywed. My husband Jay had surprised me with a weekend away. It was October, a time of the year that conjures images of autumn leaves, pumpkins on porches, and hay rides. But in Phoenix, our desert temperatures stubbornly hover well into the 90s. The 2-hour trip up north was exactly what I needed to usher in the fall season. Jerome looms over us from Cleopatra Hill as we make our ascent from the valley along twisty Highway 89. Red-roofed buildings and subtle signs of fall pepper the towering landscape that begins to come into view. Near the top of the climb, the road curves to the right and through town. Right at that bend sits a beautiful Victorian-era home. Creamy clapboard siding, terracotta veranda that runs the length of both stories. Pendant lanterns reminiscent of the gas-powered variety of the home's vintage. It looks like a set from Pirates of the Caribbean, and I can almost see the ladies of ill repute waving their kerchiefs from the second-story veranda. This is Black Hills B&B, and it's where Jay and I will be staying for the next 2 nights. We park, ascend the narrow brick stairs leading to the front door, and enter the parlor. Old wood floors creak beneath us. The window frames are dark and thick, dressed with lace. Crackly 1920s style music plays softly from an unseen source. The only feature attributable to the 21st century is the plate of chocolate chip cookies, freshly baked from the look of them. I swipe one and glance at Jay. Both of our expressions convey the same message. Is anyone here to greet us? As if conjured by our thoughts, a middle-aged woman emerges from behind a solid wood door, smiling. Her name is Sheila, and she's the owner and operator of the inn. She eyes my cookie approvingly and encourages us to have more while we complete our check-in process. I'd kill for a hot cup of coffee with cream to dunk my cookie, but none seems to be available. We follow her into the office, the door's hinges issuing a mild complaint, followed by a heavy thud as it shuts. After presenting a credit card, checking some boxes and signing here, we're ready to move on, but not before asking a few questions. Where are the best restaurants? What is there to do during the day? How many ghost sightings have you had? We ask this last question in jest, but it's obvious Sheila loves it and relishes an opportunity to answer it. Given the B&B is over 100 years old, she has plenty of information to share with us. We hear stories about guests spotting the former owner of the home, wagging her finger at them as they smoke on the veranda. Not too sinister, except she's been dead for several decades. Others have reported hearing the heavy footfall of boots on the wood floors in the middle of the night. Sheila quickly clarifies that the inn used to be a boarding house for the workers of the copper mines, and shift change was 2 a.m. That's that then. No other explanation possible. One tale in particular grabs me, as it hails from the first-story suite we have reserved for the weekend. A young boy of about 5 or 6 years has been spotted darting mischievously through the room before disappearing into the bathroom at the other end. Some guests have reported being awakened in the middle of the night by a small child who wants to play. Most believe these children to be one and the same. I allow myself to consider the possibility there was a child among the boarders. Perhaps one little boy in particular who wanted to play with his father at the 2 a.m. shift change. I feel ridiculous for it. The stories are entertaining, but I have to take them all with a grain of salt. I'm not a big believer in the notion that spirits get trapped between worlds. I tend to belong to the camp that believes not in haunted places, but in haunted people. And by the end of our stay, that resolve would weaken a touch. The next morning, Jay and I ventured to the cozy dining room, large enough only to accommodate the 20 or so guests at the inn. We're treated to strawberry stuffed French toast, fruit platter, and freshly brewed coffee. I had just dug my fork into the fluffy bread when Sheila comes to our table to check on us. She asks eagerly if we had experienced anything in the room the night before, a look of sheer, hopeful anticipation illuminating her face. I hated to disappoint her, but we hadn't, and I hadn't expected to. A couple from a neighboring table announces that the man had his hand grabbed by an unseen entity in the middle of the night. Just his voice inflection and theatrical way convinced me he couldn't be trusted. Sheila delighted and pushed him for more details. Don't encourage him, I thought. He was clearly enjoying the power this claim gave him. I rolled my eyes inwardly and returned my attention to the offerings of my plate and cup. Dinner that evening was a lengthy affair, as the sun made its slow descent behind the hill. Jay and I walked the few blocks to an Italian restaurant just down the road. The ambience inside was warm and welcoming, the aroma of roasted garlic and herbs permeating the air, the glow of candlelight tamping conversations to a murmur. We were in no rush, so we ordered for every course and lingered over dessert and drinks. The restaurant had emptied considerably by the time we made our exit into the night. When we did, we found the atmosphere outside had changed. There was a preternatural stillness that hadn't been there before, not that I had felt anyway. The air was now thick and oppressive. The people who had enlivened the streets only hours before were gone. A few may have lingered in the bar or finished up dinners of their own, but we didn't see any of them. It was as though they had simply vanished. Had they ever been there at all? I shook the thought off and chastised myself for having it in the first place. A slight breeze stirred, delivering a shot of icy air. My skin prickled, and I pressed myself into Jay for the short walk back to our room. I couldn't decide whether to move quickly and draw attention, though to whom I wasn't sure, or to move furtively, prolonging our time out of doors. We instinctively chose the latter, our footsteps echoing through the barren street. Dull yellow light from street lamps cast our shadows eerily, long and black in front of us. I was suddenly desperate to be back in the comfort of our room. But that is where it would all happen. I woke for the first time around 2 a.m. I knew I had been awakened by something. I just didn't know what. I lay motionless in the bed, trying to detect any change in my surroundings. The window of our room overlooked that stretch of Highway 89 that rises and curves into town. We were mere feet from it, in fact. The light from a street lamp down the hill made gruesome shadows that clawed at the walls and ceiling. I gazed at that window with its thin, lacy curtains, willing myself to fall back asleep. My eyelids had just started to become heavy. That was when I noticed a shadow slowly eclipse the light from the street lamp and move past the window in the direction of town. Involuntarily, I stiffened, butterflies nosediving in my stomach. My eyes darted around the room, straining to see in the darkness. I waited, but nothing happened. Then I reminded myself we were right off the lazy road through town. The shadow was large enough I was able to convince myself a car had just driven up the hill from the valley, causing the break in the light. Nothing to get jittery about. I rolled over to return to sleep. That was when I heard it. I can't be sure exactly what it was I heard on the veranda outside our bedroom, right outside the window of our bedroom, but I definitely heard something. It was heavy and rhythmic, with a hollow edge suggestive of movement over wood planks. It had a cadence to it, like that of a weary body slowly trudging home, or reluctantly leaving it, a weary body in boots. The sound lasted only a few moments before stopping abruptly. It didn't fade. It didn't draw closer. It wasn't followed by any other sound. It just stopped. Sleep was becoming less certain for me as I strained my ears to listen for anything more. Nothing. Not so much as a twig snapping or owl hooting in the distance. I listened so intently that I almost gave myself a headache. I couldn't even hear the sound of my own breathing. Maybe I had stopped altogether. Then my mind went back to that shadow. If a car had in fact been what obstructed the street lamp, wouldn't I have seen headlights? Heard a motor? We were close enough to the road, but I didn't. The shadow had just floated noiselessly past the window, despite it being large enough to be a car. Had it been, though? Or had it just been close? Miraculously, I did eventually doze off again, though not for long. At some point, I found myself awake, on my back, fully aware of my surroundings, but unable to move. I felt inexplicable agitation. I don't know how else to describe it. There was no fear that accompanied the feeling, just marked discomfort. It was as though the entire left side of my body was touching an electric fence. I wanted to move away, but I couldn't. I wanted to alert Jay, but I couldn't do that either. I was in some kind of sleep paralysis where my mind was awake, but my body wasn't. I could do nothing to break the spell. After what felt like several minutes, but was most likely only seconds, the feeling lifted. I was able to move my limbs and reposition myself in the bed. My heart rate had spiked, sweat pooling in the hollow of my neck. It occurred to me then that the side of my body that had been disturbed was the side facing the edge of the bed. My mind drifted to the young boy who reportedly would wake guests in the middle of the night. I pictured him kneeling at my side of the bed, watching me sleep, his soft, pale fingers poking and nudging me until I woke and joined him in a game of marbles or jacks, or whatever young 19th century ghost children liked to play. At that point, my imagination took over. It was 4 a.m., and I didn't see any use trying to return to sleep. I had been so careful not to disturb Jay, who seemed to be sound asleep through it all, but now I just wanted company. I wanted to hear normal sounds, see normal sights, ones I could identify and explain. I rolled over and gently whispered his name. He replied quickly with a robust, "Yeah." He had been awake too. Had been most of the night, he said. He didn't have anything specific to report, just a general uneasiness, We both huddled together in the middle of the bed, the rosy bedspread drawn up to our chins, and waited for the warm reassurance of sunlight. When Sheila asked us the next morning if we had experienced anything, I told her no. I couldn't find words for it, and I didn't want to risk sounding like someone desperate to have a paranormal experience. In other words, I didn't want anyone to look at me the way I had looked at the couple from the previous morning. Besides, I can't even say what happened that night was paranormal, and not just the result of an overworked imagination. On the other hand, part of me believes Black Hills B&B harbors some part of the people who inhabited the place decades ago, some remnant of who they were, those they loved, or the work they did. One doesn't need to believe in ghosts to appreciate the mark these men and women left behind. It's evident all over the town, in the buildings, the culture. It's why a seemingly insignificant small town built into the side of a hill draws people back. People like me. I most certainly will return, and when I do, I'll bring some jacks and marbles with me, just in case.